I'm really pleased to be with you folks this evening. I always enjoy coming over here. And Kirby, thank you for inviting me. It gives me an opportunity to talk about something that's very dear to me. But it's more than dear to me. It's something that's very important for Montana. And a while back, and it was this 1975 or so, I'm a ranch hand over in the Helmville Valley, and I'm working on this ranch, and I knew who it was I was working with, a man who was called the ramrod of the ranch, and his name was Snowball Doney. And Doney is a very common name in Montana, and really prevalent along the High Line. And this man was born and raised along the High Line, and he was living over in Helmville. He had married one of the Irish gals of the various clans that had moved there in the 1870s and 80s. And learned a lot from him. But it was that time in life, here I am, 25 years old about, and having to really make a decision, knowing that ranching is great work, but unless you own the ranch, it's going to break you. and so I knew I was going to have to find something else to do. But I wanted to stay really close with all the people whom I was working with. That traditional culture, that folk culture that I was living with in Helmville and out and about around Montana as I travel. And this relates to my own family history. What I'm going to do here is give a bunch of context, and I'm going to start really broad, and I want to go through it quickly, but to come down and then really bring a focus to the Little Shell tribe and who this group of people are and why it is they're still struggling for federal recognition today. And here I am, 1975. I grew up in the 50s and the 60s. I was one of those radical students during the movement era in an Eastern university, and I was a child of the civil rights movement and all of that ethic of my generation. And here I am in Helmville living the life of Gary Cooper, basically. That was my going on in my head, you know. And living in a great bachelor's log cabin there. And I'm talking with Bill Doney and understanding who he was and where he came from through his stories that he gave to me, and about his people here, the Little Shell in Montana, and how they were basically misunderstood, and ultimately misunderstood by the federal government. And why was that? And so I had a sense at that point in my life what I wanted to devote my energies towards, and my education. And I had this movement era ethic, and I said, well, who in Montana, who are the least among us in a sense? And it really was and remains the Little Shell tribe. And as a people who have been discluded from full membership of our overall society. And so that began the basis of my serious work on this topic. And what I really came to was the Little Shell were not the exception. They were actually the rule of what was going on in America at the time. You saw in the title the words Nehiyaw Pwat. That's a Cree word meaning Cree Assiniboine. It's just Cree for saying Cree Assiniboine. And the Nehiyaw Pwat Confederacy. And this was a confederacy that existed really from the late 1600s all the way, well, to the present, actually. Although it is, I'll say, kind of a discontinued confederacy. Polyethnic, ranged from the Great Lakes to the Rocky Mountain frontier. Polyethnicity was a hallmark of the Northern Plains tribes and had everything to do with how they conceived their relationship to everything around them. And what my thesis is here, that there was something that was going on during the 19th century and really began a couple hundred years beforehand, that most of dominant Euro-American society still has not been able to conceive, and that there was a concurrent, that all human beings living in this part of the world at the time of the reconfiguration of the North American continent were going through the same experience together, no matter who you were. It was a shared experience. And in that sense, all people who were going through the reconfiguration, especially of the 19th century, because that's where the big change occurred to what we are now, that everybody was modern for their times. We still have this conception of Europeans being modern and Aboriginal people being primitive. And I'm going to show that that really was not the case. That this polyethnicity and is the way of human transformation over time and place, and has been thoroughly active throughout human history, no matter where we look at on the globe, but we're focusing now on this part of the world. So this is the vision-questing, mystic traveler, tartan-wearing, beadwork, cart train, cattle herding, china plate, tea drinking, hymn singing, medicine song, sun dance, genuflecting, fiddle jigging, moccasin-footed, bouillabaisse, rubaboo, pemmican stew, buffalo pony, Celtic cowboy Indians. That's who the little shell are. Now this is the context. We're going to go macro here for a second. And we're going to look at before mass European immigration showed up and what was the lay of the land at the time. Now here we are. This is the Mississippi and East, and we're looking at mound culture, Mississippian kingdoms. You see, they're all over the place. Look up at the, oh, I have a pointer here, don't I? Right here. Okay, we're in Minnesota. We're at Minneapolis, St. Paul here. And you see the extent of it. And that's what conventional knowledge, we give, conventional knowledge gives us this. And these are contemporary artist renderings of what kind of society these Mississippian kingdoms were. And these are the remnants. Now, this was as large as Paris in 1450. That is, Paris was as large as Cahokia was in 1450. And cities abounded. Every one of those spots you saw on that map had villages with markets and architecture and defense and economies. These were full-blown, fully developed cities. So this is the lay of the land, and now I'm going to show. And okay, what you just saw, those artist renderings, are in all these places around. This is just what we found. This is just what we have evidence for. So it was pervasive, and all the digging has been done east of the Mississippi. That's where all the evidence is. So you can see up here, we're right here. You know, we're up in Minnesota here. There's Red Wing and stuff. Okay, but all of a sudden now we know we're putting linguistics together with archaeology, and we're understanding. Okay, we know North Dakota up there. That's, you know, right next door to us, and that's part of our ecosystem, our cultural milieu. And this is Mandan Hidatsa at the Knife River Villages, 1831, Catlin. And this is a surviving village of the Mississippian kingdoms in North Dakota. Same as we saw. And these are now we're photographing remnants of Mississippian kingdoms. Now we're in our turf. Mounds, Spirit Mound in South Dakota. And surviving legends over there in South Dakota are about the people who are in these mounds. And indeed, these are burial mounds. Okay, this is South Dakota. This is a serpent effigy. It's not the mound like in Ohio that we're all familiar with, but this is a serpent effigy in South Dakota, which is part of the same serpent culture that is the Mississippian kingdoms. Where else do we see the serpent culture? Mexico. The Olmecs, the Toltecs, Quetzalcoatl. Now, this is really astounding here. Now, this is knowledge that's information that's been there, but it's not generally known. 1883, we found this in Valley City, North Dakota. This is the layout of it. And there's what it looks like today. Then, just across the border, Pilot Mound in Manitoba. And Surrey's Ford, which is over by the Montana, North Dakota, Saskatchewan border. And earth effigies. Now, in Montana, surprisingly, Hagen site is a very, very important archaeological site of an Earth Lodge village in Montana. But there's no photographs that I could find online for it. But this is, here we are, you can see Glendive in Dawson County over there, and right at the confluence of the Yellowstone with Missouri, and this is 1831, Catlin, showing some of the same people in basically the same place where Fort Union was placed. And here we are up on the Milk River at the Ash Coulee Ranch, another Earth Lodge village site, right up in here. So we're in South Dakota. We're right here, Earth Lodge Village. Now we know the Mandan and Hidatsa are right here, but they're over here too. Now we're finding them up here. And the Cluny Earth Lodge Village, just north of us in Alberta. This is in 1900 where tribal peoples are camped on the old Earth Lodge site. And they're excavating this, and there's the layout of it. So what I'm saying is, conventional knowledge, we know and we accept that the Mississippian kingdoms are along the Mississippi and such, but what we're seeing now is, when we just put it together, the fact of the matter is the maps haven't been updated, and we aren't taught this in our schools. That the fact of the matter is we have Earth Lodge villages all the way up from Cahokia. Well, we know that they go up here to Red Wing and Minneapolis, St. Paul. Now we're finding them even more all along here, all the way up Milk River and up into Alberta here. So that's the extent of the remnants of the Mississippian kingdoms, which was the civilization of pre-contact North America, the dominant civilization. I mean, there'd be many eras of it, and there's lots to fill in, but that in a broad sweep, what I'm saying is that nothing was unknown here, and it was totally filled in with a civilization that was a highly complex civilization. And so we have a relationship directly between Mesoamerica, Cahokia, and this area, and what do we have over here? This is the Chaco Canyon and what evolved into the Hopi and the Pueblo folks. So then what occurred? Well, all of a sudden DeSoto shows up, Coronado shows up, Cabeza de Vaca shows up, and this is early, 50 years after the beginning of conquest. 1519, Cortez and Montezuma, and all of a sudden, the incursion of Mesoamerica starts coming up into our territory. And here's Coronado coming through. But what's really important, the really important one that we're beginning to understand now, is De Soto, who came in at Florida, and this is the main accepted route. But and it was pretty astounding to look at, because I mean, he's all over the place. But this is another way of reading the information that gives us another path that he probably took, and got up into Illinois. And this is what the United States government, the second one, is what the government officially says was his track. But there's another, anyhow, the point is that De Soto really made it through that territory. The thing about De Soto was this. He brought cattle and chickens and pigs with him. And it was a huge expedition. And they walked this whole way, and they drove their cattle, and they drove their pigs, and they drove their chickens. And everywhere they went, within 15 years, everybody was dead. The pigs and the diseases. This is where the first real documented diseases in our part of the world. Well, we were just looking at the Mississippian kingdoms, and you see the spread, the whole of that. Everything was interconnected. That whole network, that whole civilization, all of a sudden went from this to this. And within 15 years, De Soto went through from 1539 to 1542. By 1560, 90% of the people were gone. And the whole of that network, that whole civilization, the institutional knowledge of the whole of that prior civilization totally collapsed. So what we have then is we've got 10% of people who become remnant people of everything that was before. And they might not, that 10% might not be the ones that were the sages and the teachers. And, you know, if you were lucky, if you had a group that had, well, whatever your group was, all of a sudden you had an isolated group and you had what resources existed. So people started banding together and getting out of the way, running off into the nowhere zone. And this group of people here, called the Coahuiltecans, is totally an amalgam. They were one of the first named people that the Spanish named when they came into Texas. And there's another group called the Humanos. That just means the humans. But we call them a tribe. All they were was all these remnant peoples who band together to survive. And they became the new groups of people that we know today in Texas, in the Great Plains. And so all these new groups of people started, what survived, what mythology survived, what technology survived, whatever kind of cultural information and knowledge, skills, and abilities survived is what got pooled and into a new hybrid groups of people with mixtures of origin myths and mixtures of technology and potential. And so all of a sudden there is this new human landscape that's sitting there. Now, that's on the southern plains. And out of that plague, De Soto does it up the Mississippi River, the Ohio River, and the Missouri River. It just went like, just exploded right up those arteries and took out everything. Well, in Mexico, after Cortez in 1519 and all that, everybody in Mesoamerica is dispersing also, and so they're running north. They couldn't go through the isthmus. It was a bottleneck. And so they went north, and so they came up into New Mexico, Texas, onto the Great Plains, and that's these Humanos and Huehuetecans. Now, I just want to give a sense of languages to show the fluidity of humans over landscape. Okay, these are, Na-Dene is Athabascan, what we call Athabascan in our part of the world. And in our part of the world, Athabascans are, we know in the Blackfeet Confederacy, there's the Kainai and the Siksika and the Sarsi, we call them. Well, the Sarsi are really Tsatsuna, and they're really Athabascans. And so this is their group, but what's this group of Athabascans down there? Okay, we're going to look at Dene, and that's what Navajos call themselves, and Apache call themselves in the Southwest. They're Dene, but here we've seen Dene up here. So we got Sarsi down by Blackfoot. You see our Montana down here. So these Sarsi are moving along the plains, the tall grass prairie and short grass prairie, east to west, and also intermontane. And they come down, and the first images that we have, this is the Lipans. Well, the Lipans are also called Apaches, another word for the same group. And this is our group of people, the Sarsi from up in our part of the world. So these people passed through Montana, down the Old North Trail, into the Southern Plains, and became, and these are the Tonkawas, passed through our country into the south, and the Comanches. Okay, now who are the Comanches? I grew up thinking the Comanches, you know, I mean, John Wayne and the Comancheros and all this epic story and such. And the Comanches were a tribe of Indians. And the Comanches are the key to understanding who the Little Shell are in Montana. But we think of the Comanches, Quanah Parker, we think of Red River of the South, we think of Texas, we think of the white women captives down there. Who are the Comanches? Okay, this is Uto-Aztecan. Uto-Aztecan is also called Numic. And that's the Paiute, the Goshute, Shoshone, and you see here, it brings into Idaho and into Wyoming. Well, we know Shoshone are at Fort Hall and over at Wind River. But where else, who did the Blackfeet fight to get out of Montana, to claim Montana for turf? It was Shoshone up here. So Shoshone were all the way up here. And we see them in Wyoming. And so they're in Wyoming. Well, they're also in southern Montana. And indeed, they were asked to be part of, along with the Nez Perce and the Crow, the 1855 Blackfoot Treaty at the Judith Landing. And none of them showed up, but they were invited by the U.S. government, the Shoshone. So the Shoshone, we know, are in Montana and in Wyoming, 1600. And all of a sudden, we have them place 1705 in Nebraska and in Colorado. Well, what happened in 1680 down here in New Mexico was the Pueblo Revolt. And all of the Spanish colonials were kicked out of New Mexico and the Rio Grande Valley down to El Paso. And they had to leave very, very fast. And they got there in 1592, and in 1680, 90 years later, there was the revolt. But they had been there for 90 years. And the 90 years that they were there, they had all their livestock from Central America, the cattle, the sheep, the chickens, the horses. and they had to leave quick, and all of their farmsteads were left behind. All of it. And they had enslaved all the Pueblo Indians and all of their captive Apaches and captive Navajos, who were our Sarcees from Alberta, and had them working on their ranches so that they could live like, lords in their haciendas. So all of these Indians knew how to domesticate and handle. They've had 3 or 4 generations of working with livestock already. All of a sudden, all the Spanish are gone, but all the livestock's there. And all those horses all of a sudden moved through this network, all of these Uto-Aztecans, the Utes and the Paiutes, to the Shoshone. They went right from New Mexico here, right up through Taos, the San Luis Valley, and they went right up through Wyoming, up into Green River, and right over in here, and to the Nez Perce, and up to the Crow, and over to the Hidatsas, so that by 1705, they're all heading back down. All these Shoshones are heading down. This is just 25 years later. It really happened sooner. They're going down to New Mexico to go where the source of all the horses were. And as they're going, they're picking up Kiowas. They're picking up remnant peoples all along the way. And they're picking up remnant peoples, and they're having all these new languages. The Kiowas speak a little bit different than the Shoshone, than the Sarcees, than all these various linguistic groups, and new languages, new trade languages are forming. So all of a sudden, simultaneously, the fur trade, the Europeans are coming in, and you can see the distribution. Well, the fact of the matter is, French were out this far and into Alberta also. And by 1690-92, we have Cree and Assiniboine leading Hudson Bay Company's Henry Kelsey right to the Saskatchewan-Montana border. And we have Cree and Assiniboine guiding the La Vérendrye brothers into Wyoming and Montana in sight of the Rocky Mountains. And we have the Spanish up at the Three Forks by 1754. That's Three Forks, Montana. But who is this guy right here? Even though Thomas Jefferson bought Louisiana from Napoleon, the French were basically just holding on. It was Spanish territory. The French, Spain gave it to France to hold on to because they did not want to, they were having, the Bourbon line was in catharsis at that time. And Napoleon sold Louisiana country out from underneath the Spanish, much to the chagrin of the Spanish. But they themselves still considered it their country in 1810. Now we've got the Algonquin mix along the Great Lakes and the Siouan mix. Now this is Dakota movements, or Sioux, Dakota, and shows timelines. 1600 in Minnesota, 1780, 1825, and their distribution. 1825, they're really still south of the Missouri River. Chippewayan, this is the Sarcee groups, just to put it in there for context. Now this is Cree, and these are not accurate. There really needs to be new maps where they give a sense. 1732, 1738, 1820, 1793. But we actually know, and it's not in the map, that Henry Kelsey's with Cree and Assiniboine in 1692, right here. So they're here a lot earlier, actually. Assiniboine, Ojibwa, Grovant are Algonquian also. So we see the map is, it's time for it to be redrawn. We have a lot more new information to add to the canon about what the circumstance was when Euro-Americans really started ending up in this part of the world. And the context for all of the people who were here was one of interconnectedness and polyethnicity, and that the range that people covered was great, and it was all known land. This is Comanche, but the Comanche are trading, a major trade center, and what happens here? Well, everything here, we know that Blackfeet come down to the Mandan and Hidatsas on a regular basis. It takes 2 weeks on a horse to go from here up to Browning. So this mixing is going on. In the south, we have the Comancheros, who are mixed heritage, mixed descent, new hybrid people that are rebuilding populations from the catharsis of the huge Pax Americana. And this is in the north. This is our Little Shell people. This is a band of ancestral Little Shell in the north. Here in the south, and we know these are Comanches, and we know they're coming up to the Hidatsa villages like this, hunting buffalo. And here, they're all along the borderlands of North Dakota to the Front Range here in Montana and Alberta, traveling like this and hunting buffalo like this. It's essentially the same culture. One is French Aboriginal language, the other is Spanish Aboriginal language, new hybrid languages. This is a fascinating document. This depicts, as you see, between 1815 and 25. And this, these are the Sweetgrass Hills, these are the Cypress Hills, and this is the Rocky Mountains. And these are the Turtle Mountains in North Dakota. And you look at this, and they're on a buffalo hunt, and 1815, and we're told that the Little Shell people only came to Montana after the 1885 Northwest Rebellion with Louis Riel. And you look at it, it looks like a winter count, and it looks very familiar in that sense, and all of a sudden you go, what is this? What's this? And what do they have on their heads? These are feathers. Those are feathers. But these are chooks. These are voyageur chooks, hats, berets-like. And here they are with wheeled carts. And these are Aboriginal people with wheeled technology. And there's even, where is it? Is it here? It's a dog cart. A dog hooked up to a cart. And they're bringing their harvest back from the Front Range, where they actually used Om Pishkun, and up at the Sweetgrass Hills. And so this is going on, well, a long time prior, actually. 1822. And you see, he looks like an Indian, and he is an Indian, or what's an Indian? He's Aboriginal. But he's got a vest on, and he's got a blanket woven in England. And so he's a modern man. He's got a different style, but it's the same different style that, like a hip-hopper in the south side of Chicago compared to, I don't know, a Kahunto guy in Texas. They would look very different side by side, but they're both modern men. And this guy here, look at his name. He's a Comanche. That's a Comanche name. And all of a sudden you break it apart and you realize it's Jesus Sanchez. we fool ourselves in the way that the primary sources pass it on to us. We look at him and we think he's an Indian. Well, he is an Indian, or he's an Aboriginal or an indigenous person. And he's here before, the big piece in all of this story is that what existed before the nation states of the United States of America and Canada and Mexico consolidated their political hegemony over the land. All those peoples and societies that existed beforehand are Aboriginal people. Here's Gabriel Dumont. I mean, he doesn't come from Paris, just like Jesus Sanchez doesn't come from Madrid. But look at his moniker. It's Gabriel Dumont. Big name still in France today. You Google Dumont, Gabriel Dumont and you come up with French websites. And same thing with Jesus Sanchez. But he's also Buffalo Child and Red Son. But he's a Montana man. So here we are at the beginning of the 19th century, and we're seeing people who are dressed like this, and dressed like this, and dressed like this. The fact is, they're all related. They're cousins, or they're brothers-in-laws, or they're nephews. And what one wore, this is not European, and it's not what we think of as Indian. It's this in-between. Well, really what it is it's fashion. And he's expressing his identity through his fashion, as we still do today. And the differentiation is what we're learning now. The difference now these guys here could very well be brothers out of the same family, or they could be cousins, or they could be brothers-in-laws. But this guy could be a sun dancer, and this guy is a Catholic. That you had the choices at that time to choose your identity. You could self-identify where you wanted to within a complex, a huge variation of possibilities and potentials out there. Paisley from Edinburgh. And the role of in-between. So really, who's more sophisticated? The guy who comes out dressed from the East, or the guy who knows how to handle himself in the environment he's in? And so we have a new kind of amalgam, hybrid society, and we don't have many images of these Red River carts, this technology. When we think of Indian villages, we don't picture this being a part of our mentality as we understand Aboriginal America. And there's a reason for that, because the people who are making the pictures, for the most part, are interested in dramatizing what it is they're portraying, because these pictures go back to the East and they're put on display, and they become real public. It's like going to the movies now, or going to a premiere. It's what people had before moving pictures and photography. They had paintings. And this is beautiful, 1843, right on the Montana. On the left side here is Montana, and on the right side is North Dakota. And you look at it and go, yeah, that's Fort Union. And then all of a sudden you look at it a little bit closer and go, what's this? And what's this? Here's cattle in Montana, and Red River carts wheeled traffic in 1843. And this is way before Lonesome Dove and the Texas herds coming north. We've got cattle here. And this is a primary document, primary source document. And here's another primary source document. Father de Smet How did he get around? Who were his guides? Cree Assiniboines. Cree Assiniboine, Nehiyaw Pwat, is also a term that was applied to this group of people that, in a sense, were almost like, how can I say it? They were like the Jews of Europe, in that they were enclaves all over this vast space, and they spoke a similar language called Michif. So they could go anywhere and be able to get along. And they did. Here we are again, a Red River cart with a tarp over it. And this is on the Flathead. And so they were great guides and interpreters, and they finessed a lot of the transition during the Reconfiguration period. Father Nicholas Point, fantastic. I just love this painting of his. And two little Métis sisters, Maria and Josette. And this is in Montana. And this should be in every Montana history textbook for children. And this is their brother. A group of Indians and their children, Métis. And why was here? It's all there. It's always been here. This information's always been here. But why are we still working at trying to get it into our general knowledge base and understanding of the full chronology and the cultural dynamic of life in our part of the world here? Buffalo hunts, and we look at these guys, and they're costumed a little bit differently. And you go out there into the Montana territorial exhibit back there, and you see these pad saddles. There's Gabriel Dumont's actually is back in the exhibit room there, and these are pad saddles that these folks invented. They are called Cree saddles, but they're really this new hybrid style. And this is a camp. We have beautiful, beautiful images of teepee lodge encampments, but very few of them show pickup trucks in the yard. And then all of a sudden you realize, well, horses, yes, but what's this? Cattle lowing in camp. So it's what we think of who the Indians were, the mystic warriors of the plains and such. What we're realizing is that that's what the artists, that's what the anthropologists, that's what the historians, that's what the politicians, that's what the army told us was here, in a sense. And they were looking, they're coming to, all this is coming to at the time that Darwinism is just entering our society as a real cultural change in our Euro-American mentality. And what we're looking for is, on one hand, is survival of the fittest. Well, we're the fittest. We're the white people. We're the winners, so we've got to be the fittest. And on the other hand, they're looking, this is all happening, this is coming together, we're understanding this right at the time when the modern university is coming to, and we've got anthropologists, new disciplines are being invented. History's always been there. But anthropology and ethnography and geography, those are all coming to and being codified in the new university, 1870s, after the Civil War. And what are they looking for in this social Darwinist period of American history? They're looking for thoroughbred, pure blood. They're looking for survivals of root tribes. So they want to know Assiniboine, what's an Assiniboine? What's a Blackfeet? What's a Crow? And so everything is broken up. What we realize is that what makes a Crow, or what makes an Assiniboine, or what makes an Amskapi Pekani, a Southern Blackfeet, is not blood. It's not about race. It's about what their cosmology is, what their religions are, what their ceremonial calendar is, what their origin stories are, their narratives. So 1857, I mean, these have been sitting in archives from this time, or in family homes until they got to the archives after World War II. And this is prevalent along and throughout the Northern Plains. Let me just read, take a moment here and read this. Competing interests vied for position from Canada to Chihuahua. All the Euro-American players circulated in alliances based on trade advantage rather than colonial loyalties. Frenchmen worked for Spanish, English, and American interests. Americans worked for themselves as well as Spanish and British. Canadians worked for British, Spanish, and Americans. A new round of marriage ties united tribal trade associations. In the two towns of Pueblo and Hardscrabble, Colorado, along the Arkansas River in Colorado, in 1847, 10 years earlier than this image, there were marriages of astounding diversity. A description from a diary of the time, 1832 to 1856, the diary covered, tells us, the male part of it were mostly Americans, Missouri French, Canadians, and Mexicans. The wives are of various Indian tribes as follows: Blackfoot, Assiniboine, Arikara, Sioux, Arapaho, Cheyenne, Pawnee, Snakes, Sanpetes, Chinook, and Mexicans and Americans. One can't help but marvel at the diversity and geographical range represented by the people there at that time. So that's down in Colorado, and we know what the Comanches are in the Southern Plains and the Central Plains. Excuse me. Thoroughly modern men. These people have as equal access to the exact same technologies and trade goods as quote-unquote white people. They're living in the same place, and they have the same cloth, they have the same tools, and in a sense, they had wheels before most other people, and are the first Aboriginals to have wheels in this part of the world. Major encampments. We do not have these images in our textbooks. 1868. To give a sense here, in 1861, an anonymous journalist from England visited Red River Settlement, now Winnipeg. His description, even from Eurocentric eyes, offers a unique glimpse into the world that once was and at that time might yet have been. Unruly at best, such is the way with those who own themselves. There's an unbounded eloquence and beauty to the freedom of these people who spread out over the plains from Red River to the Rocky Mountain front and overflowed into the Columbia Basin. These are the ancestral little shell in all their confidence, élan vital et joie de vivre. The population, this is a quote from 1861, the population is the most motley sort: English, French, Highland Scotch, Lowland Scotch, Orkney Isle men, Chippewas, Crees, Assiniboines, English Cree half-breeds, French Cree half-breeds, Scotch Cree half-breeds, French Chippewa half-breeds, English Chippewa half-breeds, Scotch Chippewa half-breeds, Scotch Assiniboine half-breeds, English Assiniboine half-breeds, French Assiniboine half-breeds, Orkney Island Assiniboine half-breeds, and so on through every possible permutation of the series of white and red races. That was in a London newspaper in 1861 describing us out here at that time. These are the 49th Rangers. The border between Canada and the United States wasn't finally surveyed until 1873 and 74. And they hired a bunch of ancestral little shell people, Michifs. Michif is the Aboriginal pronunciation of the French word Métis. That's what they called themselves if they were speaking the word Métis. They actually called themselves Ochpemsook, which is a Michif term, a Cree Michif term, means they who own themselves. And you can see their voyageur sashes are still being worn in the 1870s. Many of them have moccasins on still. A lot of them have their sashes, their botas. Now, this really shows, as when I first saw this, I was just, it was fantastic because an old newspaper, 1877, Harper's Weekly, this is the first image of Sitting Bull ever. This is his camp. Sitting Bull's traveling outfit. That's Sitting Bull, the mystic warrior, the ultimate mystic warrior of the plains. And he's got 4 pickups in the yard. And what's he doing here? This is the front page of the Harper's Weekly for October or whatever it was in 1877. And he's on the Marias River heading to the Cypress Hills to Fort Walsh to confer with Sitting Bull to try to get him to come back to the United States after the Battle of the Greasy Grass. And the speech that Sitting Bull gives at that point says, "No way am I going back. You know, I grew up with the Red River half-breeds," he says, "and I'm going to stay free like they are." And I mean, and here we are. This is an amazing image of Sitting Bull early in his career, at the time of his first documentation. This is a great image of the boundary as it was put in and what's along the boundary. Skin lodges, I mean, this Aboriginal technology, this architecture, and this wheeled technology. Here's the border, and here, this is Medeowin ceremony going on here, an Algonquian Great Lakes ceremony of Chippewa people who are the root line of Montana's Little Shell. And that is Chief Little Shell. These people, if he was taken aside and put over here and a photograph was taken of him, that he'd be an Indian. And this guy here, take him aside, but you put them together, these guys are all, they're all part of the same group of people. Wintering cabins. These trains could get to be 400, 500, 600, 700 carts long. File's too big. Gabriel again. This is Little Bear, the great Cree chief who came after the Riel Rebellion to Montana, son of Big Bear, the head chief of all the Crees. Fact of the matter is, Big Bear was a Chippewa from the Turtle Mountains in North Dakota, and this is his son, and here he is wearing a Métis sash here in Montana. So the lines between who is Blackfeet, who is Assiniboine, who is Gros Ventre, those are false lines. And what that has done is it served to separate, it served to divide and conquer. It serves to say that only the root groups that could be identified as root Blackfeet or root Crow or root Cheyenne are who the United States government is going to deal with. All of that in between, all that flux, that human flux in between the core groups of these various tribal groups that actually are just remnant groups that go back to the time of conquest and those waves of plague that would lap across the continent, all those in-between people that were here and had fully formed societies sort of filling in the places between the cores of all these other tribal groups, those Aboriginal people were left out of the settling. All of the Hispano people of the Southwest, those colonial mixed-blood Spanish folks who are left over, those Comanche people basically, as well as all the people whom we call Métis today. And those are who the Little Shell are, and why the federal government has denied their petition for federal recognition for 123 years now. Where they actually were included in the Turtle Mountain settling and the Rocky Boy settling, Turtle Mountain in 1882, and then in 1892 they were cut off from the rolls, and they wandered around living in the Moccasin Flats and Buckskin Flats and breed towns of Montana. And until 1916, and Rocky Boy Reservation was created to take care of the Indian problem. The vagabond Indians camped out at the dumps of our newly forming white society communities, and that they were all included in that 1916 settling. And then in 1917, there were way too many of them for the government, so the government brought in a hatchet man, literally, John McLaughlin, the same guy who was at Standing Rock and oversaw Sitting Bull's assassination. They brought him up to Rocky Boy Reservation in 1917, and he took all the rolls that Little Bear and Rocky Boy put together with all the families that they listed as part of their people, and he cut off more than half of those people. And those people who were cut off in 1917 are the descendants of today's Little Shell. 1934, the government still recognized they had a responsibility. They created a roll cloud roll. They enumerated all of Montana's landless Indians. And this is what happened there. Give me just a couple more minutes and then I'll open it up here. In 1933, the Bureau of Indian Affairs asked the superintendent of the Rocky Boys Reservation to prepare a census roll, quote, and to include in that roll the blood quantum according to the recognized tribes in the United States of each person enrolled, close quote. The superintendent of Rocky Boys Agency, Earl Wooldridge, wrote the Commissioner of Indian Affairs he was frustrated with the directive saying, quote, if this method of listing these people is to be made mandatory, it will be necessary for the office to give specific instructions as to how families are to be divided. Shall we take, for example, the family of Chief Stick, also known as the Grant family. The father is known as Assiniboine Blackfeet, the mother is Chippewa Cree. We have absolutely no means of determining which is the predominating blood in either case. As we have advised the office repeatedly, there are no separate tribes here in the sense that in the case, as is the case on many reservations. These people have wandered together and intermarried to such an extent that they were, before they were ever listed anywhere. The majority of them do not know themselves how much Indian blood they have or exactly what tribe. It is not uncommon to hear one say, quote, my mother lived near the old fort, so she must have been Assiniboine, or my father came from Canada, so I suppose he was Cree. It must be remembered that these people have never been enrolled elsewhere, so that in the majority of the cases there was no record for them at all until they were adult or even middle-aged people. They have become one people in every sense of the word, and it promises to cause a great deal of confusion if we attempt to separate them into several tribes," close quote. The Commissioner of Indian Affairs instructed the superintendent to, quote, "secure the amount of Indian blood if possible." Wooldridge ended up making his census. Individuals stated what their family backgrounds were. The Nehiyaw Pwat nature of the people was affirmed. In 1934, the roll Wooldridge made shows that the ethnic composition of family groupings on the Rocky Boy Reservation was 42% self-identified as Chippewa Cree, 18% as Chippewa Cree Assiniboine Blackfoot, 14% as Chippewa, 8% as Chippewa Cree Assiniboine, 7% as Cree, 6% as Cree Assiniboine, 3% as Chippewa Assiniboine, and 2% as Chippewa Cree Sioux. Of the 656 people enumerated, this is after the 1917 roll that cut everybody off. Of the 56 people enumerated, 38% were listed as full-blood Indians. That is to say, 62% had European blood with Scott or French surnames in their heritage, although none named Euro-American consanguinity. The Indian agent asked only for Indian heritage and blood quantum. Yet even these percentages remain unclear. To some, being mostly Indian means full blood. Many others understand full blood to mean those who believe in the practice of the old traditional cultural ways. That is to say, pagan rather than Christian. From that time on, the Commissioner of Indian Affairs said that all those on Rocky Boy's reservation were to be, in his words, quote, designated as, quote, Chippewa Cree. All of those who had Assiniboine, Blackfeet, Crow, Flathead, Sarcee, as well as Cree and Chippewa, became Chippewa Cree. Nehiyaw Pwat family heritage was wiped clean, and the new slate of federal determination to make people fit within the Indian construct that the government had designed. That's what happened there. And in 1934, the government purchased 35,000 acres of land surrounding Box Elder to make a Little Shell reservation side by side with Rocky Boy Reservation, like the Crow and Cheyenne side by side. And what happened was, all of a sudden, they realized that to have two new administrative units, two reservations, they didn't have the resources for that. So they adhered the 35,000 acres to Rocky Boy Reservation, and those Little Shell ancestral peoples who were living in Box Elder were adopted onto the rolls of the Rocky Boy tribe. Now that was just the 108 people who were living in Box Elder at that time. All the rest of the Little Shell people living along the High Line in Moccasin Flats here in Helena and in Hill 57 and stuff didn't make it there. And so after 1934, partially taken care of, but now from 1934 and that adoption and adhesion of land, today's Little Shell have been struggling from that period of time. And this is what we see. Living in Moccasin Flats and breed towns and buckskin flats around our communities to this day. In contemporary times on the Rocky Boy Reservation, as a consequence of the growing tribe-specific nationalism throughout Indian country, a new tribal identity has emerged within the applied apartheid nomenclature that has largely forgotten the older polyethnic reality. Neil McLeod, a Cree Michif professor at Trent University across the line, tells us, in the last two generations, there has been a tendency for bands to proclaim that they are, quote, Cree or, quote, Soto or Chippewa. The multi-layered genealogies are simplified. There has been a growing tendency to simplify tribal identity. Historically, the Cree, Soto, Plains Ojibwa, and Métis and Assiniboine were allied with each other, and there was a great deal of cultural overlap among the groups. It was natural for people to be multilingual. With a rapid loss of indigenous languages, people have begun to simplify their identities and gravitate towards one tribal group. And that's really the circumstance that we're in today, that the memory of this polyethnic, multicultural, Aboriginal reality that was across the whole of the western part of the United States after the American Revolution and before major Western expansion, Euro-American expansion into the territory, that it's largely been forgotten because it's easier to use the nomenclature of the settler nation, of the conquering nation state. These are Montana images. And tents like this were at the dump out in the valley here in Helena into the mid-1950s. '40s. Raymond Gray from Helena here, the first Aboriginal lawyer in Montana. He's got moccasins on. I jitterbug with those two. Joe Duchaume, the great leader, head chief of the Little Shell. He took over when Rocky Boy and Little Shell died. Little Bear. There we have it. Thank you very much. Any questions, I'd be pleased to answer if I can.